question that came in said that they have some, let's see here, 15 and 16-year-olds who were in second and third grade in their home country. They came to the U.S. and we placed them in ninth grade. Do we need to teach grammar if they don't have the basics in their first language? Kind of what do we do with these students, I think is the general question.
Wow, that's a tough question and a very good question, because those students are obviously going to struggle if they're placed in a higher grade than the language skills that they have. And I would say, yes, you do need to teach them grammar, because most of what's going to go on in a classroom is going to be going way over their head. I can only imagine what would happen to me because I probably have about a third grade level of French comprehension if somebody put me in a 6th or 7th grade French class. Most of what would happen in that classroom, most of the reading materials we would have, most of the content would be over my head. So those students are going to want to teach grammar, but you're also going to want to teach academic vocabulary. And again, you want to build their listening skills. I would definitely want to put them on a program that builds up their language skills so they can process the language that's going on around them faster in the classroom.
Okay, and the next question that came in is, what is meant by cognitive interventions? You had mentioned that about halfway through.
Oh, good question. Yes. So, and sometimes educators use cognitive a little different than neuroscientists do. When neuroscientists use the term cognitive interventions, they're talking about improving very specific skills like attention skills and memory skills. There's one specific kind of memory we call working memory, for example, which is the capacity to, if you think about it as a teacher, instructing your students, it's the capacity to hear what the teacher says and hold that in mind for the rest of the class period, so that, or if you're reading a book, to, when you're on page 1, to hold the content and the characters and the scenery of page 1 in mind when you get to page 75. Working memory means then you're holding the memory and you're keeping it in mind. It's not exactly it's not long-term memory, and it's much longer than what we might think of as short-term memory, working memory. And that can be trained. And a lot of people don't realize that. They think, well, some people are good at memory skills and some aren't. But actually, there's quite a bit of research that shows you can train working memory skills. And when you do that, students are able to sit in a classroom and remember what the teacher said and carry that information through the whole period and keep it in mind. And then attention skills. We all have students who are inattentive. Often students who have inattentiveness and some hyperactivity are placed on medications, but it turns out we have a huge body of research from many different universities and from neuroscientists showing that you can train attention. You can actually improve a child's ability to attend without medicating them. And then you also can train children to perceive speech sounds. So all of those, that's called processing, all of that would fall under what we would call cognitive skills in the neuroscience world that teachers don't teach directly. Teachers directly teach content, teach how to read, teach how to do math problems, teach science, social studies. But building the capacity to learn is what you can train through cognitive skill interventions.
Okay, so this was a really good question that came in. When an older student shows up with no literacy in their first language, would it be a good idea to find their native language level and work from there in their native language as they learn English? What would you recommend in that case?
That's a $64,000 question. And whoever asked that may know that bilingual specialists have been struggling with that for a long time. And I'm also a speech-language pathologist, and we have too. So if we have a child who has, let's say, a language problem in their native language, their native language is just not even age level, and they don't have basic grammatical skills, and their vocabulary level is low, would we be better to teach them their first language and then build the second language on it? Now, the problem with that is from the standpoint of the human brain, that makes sense. But from the standpoint of these students having to compete on our testing within our schools and being able to learn in the classroom, we don't have the luxury of doing that. So one of the things that we recognize in education is we want the parents to know the importance of their native language. We do want to identify the students who have a learning disability in their native language so they can get the extra help that they need in their native language. But we also need this intensive approach to teaching English for them at the same time so that they can benefit from the classroom.
Okay, and here's another question. Can you give an example of an exercise that can be used in the classroom to train students to improve working memory? Talk a little bit maybe more about Fast Forward.
Yeah, well, we could talk about Fast Forward. Fast Forward is a neuroscience-based intervention that has each of the units of Fast Forward. There are several different programs. But each one of them bombards children with working memory tasks. But and that's certainly something you can do, and then you don't have to do it in the classroom. But just to give you an example of what you do in the classroom that builds working memory skills is if you are teaching content in a certain area, and then after you finish, let's say, with a section for 10 minutes, you then ask every student in the class questions about what you just said. What did I say about who discovered America, and what did I say, what was the year? And you go back and ask them questions about the content. That is actually exercising working memory. If any reading comprehension tasks are exercising working memory, if the child understands the language. If they don't understand the language, all you're doing is frustrating them. And just so you all know, just the activities you do that are working memory activities, the game concentration is a working memory activity where you have to keep all the cards that have been turned over in your head and remember where they were as you go through the task. But the nice thing is we now have technology that does that. You don't have to do those kinds of exercises in the classroom. You can actually utilize technology that does it for you.
Okay, so last question today, because I do want to keep to our 45-minute time frame that we had promised. I've got a teacher here who is asking me, she teaches 5- and 6-year-olds, and she's wondering if that is too young to get to these kids who are definitely ELL students.
I would
say
the younger you start, the younger you start, the better. The earlier you introduce the second language, the better. It just is easier for the brain. The brain is more plastic the younger a child is.